So should I start then?
Yes, you can
Perfect.
start. I'm recording.
Let me first of all share my screen and
عشان poter applicația noi, bine, cam fege ta
Someone can put himself on mute.
Can you try to
Everyone that is not talking. Great.
okay, so can you guys all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, so the topic of this speech is to, as you know, a few weeks ago, I introduced a little bit of overview of architectural approach, that one of the architectural approaches that we could actually use in the overall Android system. In this case, it was based on the clean architecture. So the purpose of this speech is try to not be so generic in the concepts of their clean architecture, but actually find some hints of how we could actually start approaching to be able to include such an architecture in our overall Android stack. So as I say, it's just few hints. So I didn't want to go deep into like coding and everything because we have a pretty large code base, and I mentioned it on the slides, and we should go little by little. But as I say, I will give a few hints of how we could actually start approaching this. So first and foremost, so just table of contents. So clean architecture recap, just so if anyone missed it, and just a small reminder of what it is, where can actually we start with all this. Then CircleCi, just wanted to pinpoint CircleCi 2.0 and workflow super briefly, that I did some work on one of the plugins, and maybe someone actually finds it useful. And the Gradle binter refactor is actually there, but I didn't have managed to include it in the presentation, and I think I wanted to take that away. I just forgot that it's actually in that, so we can have that in a different topic as well. So cool. So if we actually move into the clean architecture and how we can actually apply it. So before anything, I just would like to remind everyone what the clean architecture is based upon. So first of all, it's based upon these 5 different principles. So it's independent of frameworks. It should be testable. It should be independent of the UI, the database, and of its external agency. I don't know if you guys remember from the speech that I had, but there is really important in all these dependency circles that everything that is in the outer circle, it should depend in the inner one and not vice versa. So for example, use cases should not depend on presenters, but actually presenters are just uses of use cases. In this case, the UI, which could be an activity or a fragment, can use presenters, but the presenter should not know about fragments and activities. So as I said, this is just make sure that we always have like an inner towards dependency in all our classes and objects. So again, the really brief overview of what it was. So it was based on the clean architecture in 3 main layers, which is called presentation layer, domain layer or use cases, and data layer, which it actually uses something called the repository pattern. So as I say, a presentation layer would include MVP, MMVC, or any other approach that we want to do for the UI part. It could, so it could have like a model view presenter, or how we actually want to do that. That's not part of how the clean architecture, doesn't specify how the layer of the presentation layer should be. And that's something that it should be flexible enough for us to be able to pick. The domain layer and use cases. So here is to be able to create unitary, well-isolated pieces of logic that it could actually be used among everything in the app. So think about it like for example, like a login, where you need to call a repository where you need to perform a login, but also you want to do a validation of that, of the fields for username and password. So for example, you could have a case called, like login user or something like that, and it would actually encapsulate this. And then finally, the data layer is just to be able to, using the repository pattern, to be able to really well decouple and be able to have multiple repository sources for all of our code. Because at the moment, most of our code, it comes from the web, but at certain times we want to have code we want to save in cache, for example, in the file, or we want to save it in memory. And so the whole idea here is that all those retrieving of data and matching up with data and everything, it will be placed on the data layer. And then through the repository pattern and using interfaces and factory methods, we could actually easily, without having to change anything at all in the code, be able to add new repositories and new data sources to the project in itself. And as I say, everything is based on interfaces, so it's extremely easy to test and extremely easy to mock when you need to do things. So, and then finally, so everything is based on, is heavily use of Rx and Rx Java, the heavy use of dependency injection with the Dagger. So as I say, like using, this will be over like this thing on the right, this image, it could be like how it would actually look like with a stream, for example, using Rx Java. So a view triggers an event, or it triggers a method in the presenter, which actually will call a domain use case, which actually will go through the repository, and the factory will create, the disk or the cloud or whatever you want to have, depending on certain scenarios. And then it will push back the stream back to the view, so for the view to be consumed. And then in the middle steps, you can actually do things with that data to be able to save things in cache, for example, or any other transformation that you need to do, or whatever you want to do with that data. So once we know, and we say, okay, this is great, and shut up and take my money and let's start doing this. And now here's when actually the harder part comes into place. We have a large code base, we have a lot of use cases, and a lot of as we are developing a platform, it's a little more complicated. It could be in a single app, but I think it's definitely possible. So now the question is, where do we actually start? And the first thing is, I think, is the step 0. This approach of clean architecture, it has a heavy use of DI and Dagger and Rx Java. So maybe it's actually, some of the developers are not, accustomed, and they don't know about, these frameworks. So maybe training is actually required. Both Dagger and Rx Java, they have a very steep learning curve. And so it's not so easy to get used to them in the beginning if you never work with them. So maybe the first thing we might actually require is to be able to do some couple of sessions of training. So one specific for Dagger, one specific for Rx Java, and be able to make sure that everyone feels comfortable with these technologies. We can have, like examples, work with one-on-one sessions. We can do pair programming or something like that, but especially make sure that everyone understands the benefits and actually how to start, getting efficient using these technologies. So as I say, this is something to be considered, and I think it will be, from my point of view, the step 0. So then step 1, in our specific case, we're actually using Dagger, but we only use it in the SDK level. So what we should actually do to be able to do this is to say it heavily relies on dependency injection and the concept of inversion of control. And to be able to actually do this, we will need to introduce the DI and Dagger into our generic app. So I'll be looking a little bit how we can actually do that, and I have some ideas how we can actually do that. But of course, it's just a matter of sitting down and then be able to actually do the work required to be able to do this. It shouldn't take a lot of time, and we can stay little by little. So
Javier, there is, till a certain extent, I saw some places where Dagger is in use. I don't know if it's the way we should use it. I didn't look deep into it, but this thing was introduced already.
Yeah, but it's only on the SDK level. So in the SDK, the only place where I've seen that is being used is in the analytics and nothing else. So on the generic side, on the generic app itself, it doesn't use Dagger at all. And actually, we should heavily use Dagger and dependency injection everywhere for using this inversion of control. So this is something that we will need to take a look, because we will need to configure. We want to make Dagger instances of the SDK and our generic app a bit independent as well, because the SDK is not only used by our generic app but by the plugins as well. So it's a bit more complicated than a normal use case scenario. But this is something that it will be required to be actually be done. And before I actually want to go further with that, maybe someone can tell me what is actually inversion of control. Like, is the basic concept of DI, and I'm not sure. I don't know if everyone actually understands what inversion of control actually means, and that I think that's something that's very important for everyone to understand. And so when we call inversion of control, we're using something is called the Hollywood pattern. And this Hollywood pattern is don't call me, we will call you, which I never really understand so much, but in the Java concept way, it just means like, or in the classes, like programming way, it just means like, okay, don't call around for your dependencies, don't worry about them. When you have a dependency that, from an external class that you have, don't actually, worry about those, we'll provide them for you. So that's the whole Hollywood concept and Hollywood pattern, to be able to do inversion of control, and that's pretty important. And so, as I say, super quick, demonstration of what it actually would mean. So on the left side, you will have a class, a text editor, which actually needs a spell checker. And in this class, as you can see, we're actually hard coding inside the class, inside the constructor of the class, the dependency to the spell checker. So we're actually really coupling the spell checker and the text editor. So in the case of the inversion of control, as you can see, in this case, we say, okay, we know, you know that you need a spell checker. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about the spell checker, like how it's actually, like you creating it, we'll provide it for you. And then makes it extremely easy to be able to test it, for example, because you can always provide, you can mock versions of for example, of the spell checker when you need to do certain things. And it's a lot easier to work with as well. And you have a lot of more flexibility, for example, because you could pass an interface, and then you can, during dependency injection, you can decide which type of implementation to inject, depending on certain conditions. For example, I did this in the past for Chromecast. So I had a video player, and I had like a Chromecast video player and a local video player, and then depending if I was connected, I will inject either of these video players, which are just based on a normal video player interface, and then whoever is using the video player will not even know if it's working on a remote or it's working on a local, for example. So this is things that inversion of control allows you to do. And so as I say, when it comes to inversion of control, so bring dependency injection in Dagger to our generic application. That will be step number one. And also, it's be careful with the scopes. I know that SoundCloud, for example, is a heavy usage of dependency injections, and I know they had a lot of issues with the scoping of the components and for Dagger. So this is something that we will need to investigate and to look into to be able to restrict as much as we can the scopes. But as I say, I'm not want to go too much into details in this presentation, and I think it could be taken when we go to the next step, which is this one. It's actually pick in the simplest way we should do this. So even if if we actually agree upon this and we really like it, don't go crazy and put this everywhere in our in a repository in our actually project. So just pick a single feature, and maybe this is something that we can decide like a good candidate to do this, which it represents a good candidate for be able to have the whole stream from the view part to actually the fetching part, and then implement it with that. It could be a small feature, doesn't have to be a key component like the intro or something like that. So a feature which is not a key part of the entire stack. So make sure we have some space to be able to have maybe we introduce a regression or something like that. So at least because we don't have tests, so at least pick something that is not crucial, in the overall, part of the application, and then but it covers end to end, and then do that feature, and make sure everyone reviews, make sure everyone actually understands how it's working, and then be able to actually move on if we actually pick that. So yeah, and of course, if we actually are about to do this, include tests for everything. So if we actually do a single feature, as I say, one of the good things of the clean architecture is not only the architecture in itself, it is also because it allows you to have really easy tests and be able to test things extremely easily. So of course, any new code that it has to be done through, if we want to move into a more formal of architectural approach, we will need to include tests for everything. So every new feature according to this should be actually be done with tests and coverage, of good coverage of the new code actually being created. And also this will be great because eventually we'll add as coverage into our own overall solution. And then finally, I think also it's important, the feedback and repeat. So as I say, like once we actually have feature number one with this architectural approach, we all like it, we agree upon it. Let's gather some dead feedback. Maybe there is something that doesn't have to. It's not a hard written rules. I mean, maybe for certain cases can be applied differently depending on the use case that we actually have. But in general, it's pretty clear how things work. And if we are all happy with the new approach and the new feature, then repeat it with new features that we need to develop and be taken small portions at a time of our overall code base. And especially, I think this is important. Be hard on code reviews. If we stick to a new architectural approach, let's make sure we actually use it. So, it's not worth it to, try to make, maybe a couple of us like push to a new architectural approach if we all not, paddling towards the same direction. So make sure that if we are actually picking a new architectural approach, we are all try to follow it when we are developing new things, and let's make sure that code reviews actually represents that to be able to check that out. And then, so yeah, as I say, like I didn't want to go so much deep into how exactly we could actually do it in our app, because I think the easiest way is, as I say, is first of all, maybe to do some training. I just want to do a general recap of what I talked. So maybe some training for maybe some people is not aware or doesn't have experience with both Dagger or RxJava. Pick a single feature. So just something that is not critical, something that we can work with, something that we can introduce the whole, from top to bottom approach to the clean architecture. And then once actually we have that, then, just to, repeat. So feedback, developer feedback, and repeat, and then keep, slowly but surely moving new features, maybe later more critical features into this type of approach to make sure that everyone, is on the loop, and then everyone also clearly, understands deeply like the whole concept and how everything should be working. And so if we move and just briefly on CircleCi, I know the guys, you run, and some of the guys work in CircleCi, and for the SAP app, and then maybe some people were not aware that how some of the the benefits that CircleCi 2.0 had. So I just wanted to do a really brief introduction as well with CircleCi. So it actually has a first-class support for Docker. I don't know if any of you guys are aware with Docker, but one of the cool things with Docker is that it allows us to be able to set up an environment and be able to configure an environment in just a breeze. So Docker, one of the greatest things, it can actually launch and prepare new environments in just a few, even milliseconds sometimes, which actually speeds up a lot, our overall build time on Circle, and that's one of the reasons why we've seen these massive gains. One of the other things is, for example, workflows. As I say, I think I talked about it in the Android channel. Workflows is something that for certain case could be pretty powerful. I put in the next slide. There is pros and cons of using workflows, but at least everyone aware that that we actually have that option as well, and then maybe it's interesting for certain things which when it works in serialized way, it takes way too much time, and we want to really reduce that time, even it takes a bit more resources.
I have to say that it has a couple of workflows. First, it's not really stable yet. And the second thing is the fact that it uses containers that are the same share containers. So
that's what I put in my two slides. So
it's not stable yet. So just be aware.
Yeah. So thanks for the point on. So yeah, as I said, like you have like you can look in CircleCi 2.0. Already the guys done some good work to be able to have our own image, for our own environment, for our own Applicaster Android environment, and that's something that we could actually utilize for be able to, if we actually require a Docker image, we could actually use that Docker image for whatever we need. And maybe also this could, unify the way we are actually using Circle, and builds across all our repositories. And I think it's worth for everyone checking. So as I say, workflows, and what you mentioned, that one of the good things with workflows is that there are certain tasks that it could be run in parallels or could be run sequentially. So when using a workflow, it will allow you to clearly identify those those different steps, and then you could actually parallelize or even block if it's required. For example, like not in our case in Android, but imagine that you want to have a double check for pushing something to production. So you could have a double check on the workflow, so it will go into a halt until actually someone approves that. But anyway, in our case, it will be something that, as I say here on the next slide, especially would it be worth it if we are starting to like heavily use testing. This is something that it could actually work as help us to, and as you say, maybe later when it's more stable, actually use the parallelism for be able to speed up a lot of the builds. Especially we could in parallel we could do things like UI testing, instrumentation testing, integration testing. All these things it could be run in the parallel, and also thanks to the clean architecture, it's really pretty clear defined how we could run different tests on different layers of the presentation layer as well. And it will be worth it because most likely it will reduce quite a lot our build times. What I've seen so far, for example, in the plugin, if anyone is interested, let me know. One of I use it currently in the library selector plugin. And as I say, like I seen like 6 times or 7 times build time reducing, like reducing time using Circle 2.0. It went from almost 7 minutes, 7 minutes something, to 1.2 minutes or something like that. So it's a massive gain, and it will definitely speed up our CircleCi. And also it's good because also it also means that less time building all our containers would actually free up more resources. So we don't stack up in case we start building up more things, and then we will not we will allocate less resources as build time will be actually lower. So when I mean resources, I mean containers. And then also, as I say, with workflows, especially be careful with the container usage. As Ran mentioned, the workflows, when it's run, especially in parallel, for example, if you have like 4 or 3 lanes running at the same time, it's actually 3 different containers. So that's something to be aware of, and something that I mentioned it, that is something that we could do a use case study to be able to understand if it would be worth it. And also, the good thing as well, if we use 2.0, is that we will have more containers available as things will run quicker. But anyway, so this is something to take into account, and I think it's definitely for everyone worth it to take a look at workflows and be able to CircleCi, more than workflows, but CircleCi 2.0, and be able to, whenever they can, start using it in their own libraries, and have this benefit from these massive gains in build times for all your plugins or whatever you're working with that is using Circle. And yeah, I think that's from my side for today. So
I would like to add 2 more things regarding CircleCi that is important. So using CircleCi 2. Can you hear me?
yeah.
So CircleCi 2.0, basically the main gain that you have from it is the use of Docker. Docker basically allows you to easily create something that is like an image of like set of basically what it does, it divides a machine to different containers, and each container you can easily load an image that contains like a pre-installed stuff. So basically we can just skip all the heavy installation that we're doing for Android SDK and all this tooling that we're using by setting this. One example you can find under the Zap Android repository. So under, I will share the screen. So if I will go here, under the Zap Android, you can have a good reference of a good Docker file with good caching. Why I'm saying that it's good, because not because I'm glorifying my work, but because it was a joint work with engineers from CircleCi. So it's optimized to a certain extent, but it's optimized. We've done the work together with their engineers. So you can take a look here. There is a Docker file. One important thing, if you're creating a Docker file, it's not enough to have it in the repository. It needs to be published to Docker Hub in order to be able to, in order to enable it on CI. So this is one thing. The second thing is what I wanted to say regarding CircleCi. Another important thing that you can do is that you can run, because it's based on Docker, so you can run the Docker locally, and you can do 2 things. First, you can debug it locally instead of doing it on SSH. And more important, I think, is that you can run it on the same environment that our build environment is built. So currently, if you're running scripts like build app or all this kind of stuff, prepare workspace, all these things, it's not 100% accurate because we are running it on Mac, while on CI it runs on a Linux machine. So using Docker, basically you can load this Docker image and this Docker file and basically mimic an identical environment that our CI is built upon. That's it. Thanks, Javier.
No, you're welcome.
Anything you want to add, or anyone wants to add regarding what Javier was explaining us?
Yeah, so I would have one comment. Everything is cool with the Dagger and RX Java. It's the brilliant way to write the Android app at the moment. But with the training, I would start with the dependency injection, because you can't understand Dagger without understanding dependency injection. Ideally, in the like comparing to build a factory and factory method, like, yeah, whenever that gives, I believe, a bigger image what dependency injection is, and then it's easier to understand the Dagger itself.
Yeah, of course. I mean, in the training with Dagger, the first thing to do is to introduce dependency injection overall. So, because Dagger has a really specific way of using dependency injection. Between 1 and 2 is a massive difference as well with the usage of components, and actually doesn't use reflection anymore. So, yeah, it's a good point. Thanks, Anna.
Cool. I would say one comment. Dagger, I think that it's great. It just has a very big learning curve, like a very long learning curve. I think even more, at least for me, more than RX. But once you get the concept, you understand it. There are things that are kind of ambiguous in the implementation of Dagger 2. It's not 100% clear where to use what, but once you use it, and I think that it's also important to understand the concept, because dependency injection could be done in many ways, right? You can basically pass your object in the constructor or pass it in a setter wherever you want. Dagger is using it a little bit differently. It builds a graph of all the objects like a graph of all the objects in the app, but I think that before jumping into implementation, it's very important to understand how it works, because it gives much more insights.
Yeah, so then I could maybe prepare a Dagger speech, so or someone can do it. So if someone is up to the task, to be able to explain DI and Dagger. So
I think that we had one in the past. It would be good to have another one, but I really think that before you jump into implementation, like before you're really writing the code, before you're really implementing the code, it doesn't matter how many presentations and decks you will prepare, it won't be enough. So I think that people should create their... Can you hear me? Can someone hear me, or I'm talking to myself?
No, we can hear you.
Okay.
There you go.
Cool.
Sorry, I missed all that part. I don't know, my internet just went bananas. So.
Yeah, I believe what the good solution is to present the general usage of how we could use a dependency injection or RX Java inside of our app. Typical usage is to inject the view, right? So in general, what would be our pattern we could follow in the app, and this is a good solution, I believe.
Yeah, cool. So it means, Anna, that you're doing us a presentation next week.
No, I'm not. I use Dagger, I used RX Java, but I don't feel a guru in this matter. So no, I'm not.
Okay, we will talk about it. Cool. So we have 20 minutes, so we can do a short brief about the current things that people are doing. Elad, do you want to start?
Can
Just
you
because
hear me?
you're first on my list. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm working on data source, and
Can you talk a little bit louder? You sound very distant.
Okay, so I'm working on the data source, and I'm encountering a problem, a crash, when you are launching the app again after you press the back button. So what happens?
After you press what? After you press
the back
what?
button. when you're launching the app, press back button, then launching the app again. So some device crash when some device crash in this flow. This has happened because we are using the just context object that is part of the liquid library. And when I noticed that when we are creating two instances of this class, so the library, I don't know why, but it's having a crash in the native code. So I'm working on this part to fix this implementation. I will assign a pull request to Gil and Ruben. They can take a look at the changes that I made. And so if you're using a data source plugin, be aware for this.
This doesn't happen for Televisa, the Portes Interactive, that is using data source provider and is using it in production. So
I can show you at least in my device that it will happen. It happened in host and then it happened in Reshet, and Reshet also in production. It's not happened in all the devices, but in some devices it happened.
Try to reproduce it on Televisa, the Portes Interactive, okay? The main difference is that in Reshet and Hot, you're not using the straightforward solution that the data source provider was built for, which is using within the UI builder. You're doing some mixed things. And also, maybe Gil can also give some more light, because we did a change in an SDK in the way we instantiate the context and the request. So I suggest that you will be in sync before any change is done.
I tell you, we had this crash before because we are creating two instances of the JS context. It's not two instances. It's like we create an instances to the JS context object, and then in the same field we made a new instance again, and we fixed it. Okay, it was fixed already. But when you're pressing on the back button, so all the activities are like the operation system kills all the activities, but not the application class. The application is still live. So this means that all the static fields in the application are still live. And then it happened. Then this is a static field in our application, and then we are creating a new instance again when we are launching again the app in the app intro activity. So I know it's not happen all the time, it's like, and not in all the devices, but I have a device that for sure can reproduce it every time in all the application. I will test it also in Televisa. And I can show you this.
Cool.
This is what I'm working now. Another thing that I'm working is also related to the data source. It's handling an error in the JavaScript side. When we are making a request or something like that, in the data source part. So if we have a timeout or if we have an error for some reason, we are not handling this. We are just like returning the data source plugin return status code 200, even if we had an error. So it's not.
This is dependent. It's dependent on the specific implementation of the data source.
Yeah, it's dependent on the specific implementation of the data source. But in our documentation, it's like, I don't think it's there. So
I suggest that you talk to Francois. and
Yeah.
and share
I
with
talked
him
to
the insights?
Yeah. Yes, but in our code, if you will check our code, you can see that we are just sending error in the listener. We are sending if we are getting an error, we are sending -1 or something like that. So we are not handling the error even if we get it. So this is something that we should handle and display a toast to the user or something like that. It's like two parts. One part in the JavaScript, in the JavaScript implementation, and one part is in our implementation that we are not displaying a toast or
But what do you mean by displaying a toast? Let's assume that the component was
like
not successfully loading, I don't know, one list of a show.
Yeah.
So, and you have like 10 components on the screen. So what do you want to do? To present 10 toasts for each component?
No, we should, this is, if we are using a composite component, so we should handle it in this way, and if we are using a standalone component, we should handle it in other ways. So it depends. Depends the component that we are using.
Okay, it needs to have some product thought, because I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not really sure. I think that the retry mechanism is one option, and I'm not sure that the user must be aware, like if there is an error that is or server internal error that is not returning a response for a specific show or component. I'm not really sure.
I can tell you that in auto application, like we have you know what? I give you an example. In Hot, if I'm turning off the Wi-Fi, so we can still, jump from one tab to other, and you will see nothing to display in each tab, and it's like, it's always like this, and the user does not have any idea that his Wi-Fi is turning off.
But this is another issue. This is handling connectivity. You can have a connectivity manager that is doing it, but it's not related to the JavaScript data source provider. If you have connectivity, this should be dealt in a way of connectivity, and yes, I agree, but this is like the app context.
But if the data source provider doesn't send me the right error, so I cannot know this is
no, there are two, it's like two separate issues. The fact that the data source provider should return you the exact relevant error, I totally agree. What I'm not sure is whether you need to, if there is like an internal server error, that you should handle it in this way. And also, I think that connectivity issues is completely different, should be managed in a different context, in a different way, in a different place, like not related to a specific request. We need to think in a product way about how our app supposed to deal with connectivity issues. Like this is one thing, one separate thing, in my opinion.
Regarding the connectivity issues, I actually talked to Kim and the designers for providing us UX as a overall, for the apps as well. So we could later show this, for, in a general specific way, like the connectivity issues. So, because at the moment that, yes, I realized the same issue with something else a while back, that we didn't show anything, and, we were showing errors with network and all that stuff differently in different places. So I talked to Kim and the designers they're aware of, and then they should be like coming up with a more generic solution for everywhere in the app. So you know.
Okay. So maybe we can talk about it. Maybe I will talk about it with Gil or Juan. If you want, we can talk about it.
Yeah, I think that the one thing for sure that you can talk with Gil and to implement is the errors that the library is returning and are not handled. like somewhere in the code, we should be able to handle this. I'm not sure that we need to present something for the user, yes or no. This we can argue, but the fact that we should be receiving the correct error, this for sure.
Okay, this is what I'm doing now. I will update Francois regarding to the documentation. That's all.
Cool. Next. Merav or Gil?
Okay. Yes, just a quick one. We updated the SDK that we are compiling our apps to 26, the new one. We also updated the support libraries, so it did went to a QA cycle and it went good, but obviously we didn't check all the plugins. So I wrote it down in the channel a few times. I want to say it once again. If you own a plugin, please check that it compiles with the new Android SDK. That's it.
You have a test, right? Or you have a master, right? What I propose to do, I propose to delete
Merav is here?
support current RC, okay?
Can you hear me?
Remain,
Yes.
Yeah.
remain.
So just like Gil said, we worked on updating the SDK to 26, and now I'm working on introducing a new component to the UI builder, the horizontal list or Rails component. I'm not sure yet how to call it.
Cool. You will be missing one thing, which is the way to publish the manifest of the component. We are hopefully by the end of the week you will have it. So
Okay.
like the entire implementation, you can do everything, but in order to introduce it inside Zap, it will require work from our side. So I wanted to ask you regarding the deep linking, app links. Was
App
this
links.
implemented, done?
It's actually now Jenny of Kenya is testing it today. So I'll let you know when you can publish it to everyone.
Cool.
Hey, talking about the component you're working on, Javier, is this something that could help us with Chagris? Don't we need a similar component?
Sorry, which component? That I didn't hear it.
I think Merav, you said it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's something that I talked to you, Ron, like a while back, and also talked to Francois how to actually do this horizontal list component. So I didn't know anyone else. Yeah, I didn't know anyone else.
So maybe you should collaborate because
Yeah.
it sounds like it's the same. The only thing I'm telling you is that we are missing now is the way to introduce it to the system because it's not a regular manifest. We are currently working now on it. So I will update once it's done, but the development should be the same. You can start developing it together, or I don't know, split, understand the requirements, and it will be. Also, it will be important to have some insights about how complicated it is to add a new component into the infrastructure, even though we will soon, maybe Gil can, I don't know if there is a need to elaborate more, but soon we're going to rewrite the entire component list layout. So things might change, but we will make sure that we are supporting all the implementation. So just like heads up.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so we can we can think about that, and then we can find a way to collaborate on that.
Gladly.
Cool. Who else? We have 5 minutes, so we have time for one person more. Atanas, you want to update us about something?
Yeah, well, nothing dramatic really. Several small issues, and I had some fun working on the layout. I had to change the ratio of image in a cell to 16 by 9, and I found out why the 16 by 9 ratio was special. And do you guys know why? 16 by 9. Why is it special?
Because it's a beautiful ratio.
Okay, so if this you want, I probably gonna
Sorry,
say
what?
the boxes here that are always here. So that's
I didn't hear that.
anything sounds.
Anyway, like Peter told me that it was actually the ratio that modern television sets are using, modern TV sets. And, yeah, and like it's interesting because when I changed the ratio, the page actually started looking better, and it may be because people just know this ratio because they're seeing it every day. So yeah, it was fun. I was actually solving a system of linear equations and making sure that I can tweak the things without breaking others. So like it was pretty interesting task. That's it.
Different sizes. It's really nice.
Yeah, one last thing from my side as well, that it might, just in case that I don't forget, I did some changes on the React Native side. So now the plugin allows to be able to show the developer. So if there is any one of you guys that are working with React Native, or I know you Tarek did, and also like, or like when any web developer that is doing React Native, so with the latest changes, it will be able to show the React Native developer dialog, and then we can actually load your local bundle. You could be able to debug and everything using Chrome. So all the nice features that React Native has, it will be allowed from now on from any of our debug apps. So you're aware of that.
Thanks. Okay, guys, I think I'm sorry, but we don't have time for everyone unless someone has something that he really wants to share with us. This is very important. I think we will wrap up the meeting. Is there anybody that wants to update about something? Ruven? No. Okay, cool. So thank you, everybody, and I will publish it later today. The very interesting talk that Javier was giving us. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye, guys.